Good day, everyone. Today we are going to tackle about the Diary of a Young Girl. Anne Frank is the author of this book, so I am going to introduce her first. Her full name is Annalise Marie Frank. She was born on June 12, 1929 and died in 1945 at Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Before we discuss what's the story all about, I'm going to define first what is a nonfiction. Nonfiction are stories that are based on events that actually happened in reality. The characters are real people. And our topic for today is a nonfiction. It is the diary of Anne Frank, which was written during the Nazi occupation, where she was in hiding for 2 years with her family. After their arrest, helper Miep Gies found Anne's diary together with helper Bip Vosgejel and they kept it. Upon hearing the death of Anne Frank, they gave it to Otto Frank, who was the only survivor of the 8 people in hiding in the secret annex, telling him, "This is your daughter Anne's legacy." Then this was published in 25th of June 1947. So there are many essential messages of this book, but the most important message is that all people have the right to live in freedom. Anne's story shows us that just because people may be a different religion or race doesn't mean that they should be treated differently. And here's the summary of the Diary of a Young Girl to be discussed by Ms. Nietes.
Diary begins on her 13th birthday, June 12, 1942, and ends shortly after her 15th. At the start of her diary, Anne describes fairly typical girlhood experiences, writing about her friendships with other girls, her crushes on boys, and her academic performance at school. Because anti-Semitic laws forced Jews into separate schools, Anne and her older sister Margaret attended the Jewish Lyceum in Amsterdam. The Franks had moved to the Netherlands in the years leading up to World War II to escape persecution in Germany. After the Germans invaded the Netherlands in 1940, the Franks were forced into hiding. With another family, the Van Dans, and an acquaintance, Mr. Daza, they moved into a small secret annex above Otto Frank's office where they had stockpiled food and supplies. The employees from Otto's firm helped hide the Franks and kept them supplied with food, medicine, and information about the outside world. The residents of the annex pay close attention to every development of the war by listening to the radio. Some bits of news catch Anne's attention and make their way into her diary, providing a vivid historical context for her personal thoughts. The adults make optimistic bets about when the war will end, and their mood is severely affected by Allied setbacks or German advances. Amsterdam is devastated by the war during the 2 years the Franks are in hiding. All of the city's residents suffer since food becomes scarce and robberies more frequent. Anne often writes about her feelings of isolation and loneliness. She has a tumultuous relationship with the adults in the annex, particularly her mother, whom she considers lacking in love and affection. She adores her father, but she is frequently scolded and criticized by Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan and Mr. Dazel. Anne thinks that her sister Margaret is smart, pretty, and agreeable, but she does not feel close to her and does not write much about her. Anne eventually develops a close friendship with Peter Van Daan, the teenage boy in the annex. Mr. Frank does not approve, however, and the intensity of Anne's infatuation begins to lessen. Anne matures considerably throughout the course of her diary entries, moving from detailed accounts of basic activities to deeper, more profound thoughts about humanity and her own personal nature. She finds it difficult to understand why the Jews are being singled out and persecuted. Anne also confronts her own identity, though she considers herself to be German. Her German citizenship has been revoked, and though she calls Holland her home. Many of the Dutch have turned against the Jews. Anne feels a tremendous solidarity with her aggrieved people, and yet at the same time, she wants to be seen as an individual rather than a member of a persecuted group. During the 2 years recorded in her diary, Anne deals with confinement and deprivation, as well as the complicated and difficult issues of growing up in the brutal circumstances of the Holocaust. Her diary describes a struggle to define herself within this climate of oppression. Anne's diary ends without comment on August 1, 1944, the end of a seemingly normal day that leaves us with the expectation of seeing another entry on the next page. However, the Frank family is betrayed to the Nazis and arrested on August 4, 1944. Anne's diary, the observations of an imaginative, friendly, sometimes petty, and rather normal teenage girl, comes to an abrupt and silent end. Otto Frank is the family's sole survivor, and he recovers Anne's diary from Nieppe. He decides to fulfill Anne's wishes by publishing the diary. Anne's diary becomes a condemnation of the unimaginable horror of the Holocaust, and one of the few accounts that describe it from a young person's perspective. Since Anne's diary is a true personal account of a life in hiding, it is inappropriate to analyze it as a novel or other work of fiction. Parts of the diary were intended for public view, but others clearly were not. To appreciate and interpret the diary, it is necessary to consider its horrible context, World War II and the Holocaust, before any discussion of plot development or thematic content. Thank you.
A short literature review of A Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. The main action of the novel comprises just 2 years of life of Anne Frank during the family's refuge in the annex adjacent to their firm. The rising action occurs when the family faces arrest by the end, therefore there is no falling action, as the end itself is the falling action. The Nazi regime in Germany and Hitler are antagonists of the novel, as the regime has tried its best to obliterate the entire Jewish race from Europe. Anne Frank is the protagonist of the novel. The novel starts with her entry as she starts writing her diary and ends when she is arrested along with her family and as the diary abruptly comes to an end. The novel shows both static as well as dynamic characters. The young girl, Anne Frank, is a dynamic character as she shows a considerable transformation in her behavior and conduct by the end of the diary. However, all the other characters are considered to be a static character as they do not show or witness any transformation, and they are Mr. and Mrs. Otto Frank, Margot, and Peter. The climax in the novel occurs when a mole blows the whistle and the families are hiding in the annex and are arrested. The novel shows various moods. It starts with a quiet, a somber, and a bitter mood, but turns out to be a highly exciting at times and tragic when it reaches the end toward their arrests. The novel shows both external and internal conflicts. The external conflict is going on between the Nazi regime and the Jewish race on the one hand, and the Nazi army and Anne's family on the other hand. The internal conflict is going on in Anne's mind about her mother's attitude, her father's love, and her feelings about Peter Van Daan. The most important motif of the novel are adulthood, fear, refuge, and death. The novel takes place in the Frankfurt, Germany, and the Netherlands.